you so much for being with us tonight, Angie, and we're really excited about the message that you can share with our community. So I think going off of Watson's introduction of you, we just want to hear a little bit about the services that CRIS provides for refugees and immigrants in Columbus and a little bit of insight into what you do.
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me. CRIS is Community Refugee and Immigration Services, and we were founded in 1995. Our first office was in the garage at the Laotian Temple on the east side, and we've graduated from a garage and now actually have a building. So about 60 employees now, aside from the 9 that I had to lay off last week. CRIS does refugee resettlement work, which means we help refugees who have come directly from overseas get settled into their housing, Social Security office, health screening, all those things that need to happen that first 90 days that a refugee comes to the U.S. And then after that, we pick up with programs to help people find jobs, learn English. We have legal services program. It's how I got involved in 1998 as a volunteer lawyer. And I never seem to leave. So yeah, I've been there for a while. Probably, oh my gosh, were you even born then?
Not quite.
Not quite.
So for a few days, I've been working there a few days.
So where does the connection really start with you? Do you connect with the refugees and immigrants before they come to America? So how does that start off?
We do have some involvement in helping file applications for people before they come. But the way the processing works is somebody is forced to leave their home country. They flee to another country. And I'll use the example of the Bhutanese because I don't think many people are aware that Columbus actually has the largest Bhutanese Nepali refugee population in the country. So the Bhutanese were forced out in the early 90s and went to Nepal. They're Nepali ethnicity and predominantly Hindu. And they then lived in a refugee camp for almost 20 years. It's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees' job to provide protection. And so they're in the camp and they sit there and they sit there and they start businesses and they start forming a structure for education. And so some of the children, get education while they're there. And the first priority for the UN is that people repatriate, that they go home. That's the first choice of, for any refugee, can they go home? But typically that's not possible. So the second choice then is they would be integrated into the country that they fled to. So in this case, Nepal, they speak the language, they're more culturally similar, but Nepal couldn't absorb them either. And so they waited for 20 years for some international solution. And finally the United States said, okay, we'll take 60,000 Bhutanese refugees over a period of 6 or so years. So they've been coming now a little more than that. So we're actually getting to the end of that pipeline. But we're seeing people who are buying houses now in sort of the Black Lick area. So it's been great to see their progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one question that comes to mind, people always wonder, how do people from all around the world end up in Columbus? We're not on either coast. We're kind of some center of the country. How does that work?
So with the Bhutanese, for example, they started out, the first group that came, they didn't know anybody in the U.S. So the way refugee resettlement works is then if refugees are referred to a third country for resettlement like the United States, which takes less than 1% of the world's refugee population for resettlement, then the people are allocated based on, if they have a family member already here, then they would go to that location. So with the Bhutanese example, they get allocated amongst the 9 national resettlement agencies. We resettle for 2, Church World Service and Episcopal Migration Ministries. And those 9 take a percentage of whatever the annual pool is. So it was 85,000 last year, so they spread that 85,000 out. So those who don't have family members just get put into the pool. There are localities like ours that say, well, we have capacity to work with Nepali speakers, Somali speakers, Arabic speakers. And so there's a grand plan for where people will go. But if they have family already here, then it gets to be kind of a snowball effect. So then they come to join their family. But with the Bhutanese, which was also common for Somalis, Columbus became a hub and a welcoming community, and people tell their friends, and they hear this is a good place to live and work, and they can find service sector jobs, and so, it becomes a magnet. And so that's why Columbus is a hub for a lot of refugees.
And so you mentioned a little bit the family connections, people trying to come reunite with their families. How long does that process usually take?
So the State Department reopened a process in fall of 2012. We're just talking about refugees. There's a whole other system for filing for immigrant visas. So we had many, many people filing in 2012 and then subsequently. So a few of those folks that filed in 2012 have come. So it's taking 3.5, 4 years plus. They go through DNA testing to prove they're related to someone here. They go through a series of many interviews. They go through what I'll call extreme vetting, and then they're able to come join their family member in the U.S.
So I guess on extreme vetting a little bit, where do you see that going? So you've mentioned you kind of consider what the vetting that's already taking place extreme vetting. So what kind of things do you think they could do to make it more extreme?
It's hard for me to know how they could enhance it further. And I was talking to Caroline on the phone and referencing there was a really well-written article in the Washington Post this week written by a Homeland Security employee who said, we already have extreme vetting. I know because I did it. And we only have a certain amount of time to talk about all the steps, but there are many, many interviews with many different with Homeland Security and a State Department contractor and all kinds of databases and security clearances. And the thing to know is if there is any doubt, the person won't be approved to come.
And going off of that a little bit, so they go through this process. Is any of this time sensitive? Like what are kind of the implications of the recent executive order on that whole process?
So as we talked about, this is changing every 5 minutes, and I peeked at my phone and saw that, so there was the executive order which, banned arrivals. Then we had a court order that threw out parts of that ban. Piece of that ban that was not thrown out was the piece that cut the refugee arrivals in half. That still stands. But then, 10 minutes ago or whenever, I saw a notice that that the government has filed an appeal. So it's all very much in flux what's happening right now. What's difficult from my perspective is that I sit across the desk from those people who filed applications 4 years ago, and I every day in the parking lot am trying to get out of my car without somebody stopping me before, to say, what's happening with my case? What's happening with my case? And I'll say, we're just waiting. We're just waiting and waiting. And so, we put this process out there for families to be together, and the ban was, in my mind, not thought through in that it affected people who were in flight. So I'm, I have children, and I have the good fortune of never having had to live in another country from them, have never had to make the decision to take one child and have to leave the other one with grandma while I try to make my way and see if I can find safety with the promise that I can apply for that child when I get to the United States. I've never been in that position, and I'm very thankful for that. But I know a lot of people who have been in that position, and they followed the rules. And I sometimes forget, because I'm so immersed in refugee issues, that I have to talk about Refugee 101. So what happens in the United States is not like what's happening in Europe. Every refugee is approved before they come here. They go through this extensive vetting process that takes at least 18 to 24 months. And you may have heard there was an issue with 2 Iraqis in Kentucky a few years ago, and the process was slowed down and the vetting was enhanced, and it's been enhanced and enhanced. And I just, from the way the executive order was implemented, it calls into question how much information is being gathered from all those State Department and Homeland Security people who've been doing this work for so long. That I'm hopeful that they're looking at, how does this really work? And I think they'll find more reassurances once they've explored that.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky enough to hear this evening from one of our own faculty members, Ms. Garita. She told us a little bit about her experience, and that she's sensing in the time that she's been in the United States that attitudes towards immigrants are changing. She felt much more welcome when she first moved here. The perception was that, immigrants were people that were excited to be here and wanted to work, make this country better, contribute, and now people are a little more uncertain. They're not as welcoming. Is that something that you feel in the Columbus community? Is that reflected here?
We've certainly been extremely fortunate with our public officials, the mayor, the city council, county commissioners have been extremely welcoming and supportive for many years. So we've been lucky in Columbus. What I will say is we've seen an outpouring of support of people who want to be welcome teams. We have many church groups that we work with, or families, and people that I like to get personal one-on-one experiences with families because I think that's what changes minds and hearts. And once you know someone, it's much harder to be afraid of them.
Yeah. And I guess going a little bit more into that, can you just shed some light on who's coming to Columbus? Who are the people that you've been interacting with? What does that community look like for you?
So for fiscal year 2016, which for us is October, starts October 1, we resettled 833 individuals, and there are 3 resettlement agencies in Columbus. So of our 833, I think 38% were Bhutanese, followed next by 30-some% Somali, and then we had Iraqis, some Syrians, Congolese, Ugandan, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Iranian, a mix of people. And, many of the Iraqis served with the U.S. military. Somalis come, and I should never read the reader comments that I see on, but there's such a misperception. I was doing a press conference with 5 of these moms this week, and the comments say, none of these people work, and I thought, actually, all 5 of those women work at least one job, and maybe 1 or 2 jobs, and they are doing jobs that most people don't want to do. They're doing housekeeping in hotels, and they're doing warehouse work. Sometimes we'll have somebody who can jump right into maybe what their background has been, but that's much harder. So when they're first here, they've got to take any job and get going. So we have, we have a real mix of people. It's tough usually when people first arrive. Hard to find housing for folks who don't have any credit history, don't have a job. We give them $1,125 per person one time. That's a federal pass-through, so that's their startup money. So if you're a family of 2, that doesn't go very far by the time you've paid a rent deposit and your first month's rent. And then single individuals only get a limited amount of assistance, and they've got to really get to work. So we're fortunate right now the economy is good, so we've been able to find jobs pretty easily, work with a lot of big employers that we've got one, Sugar Creek, that provides a vehicle to pick up refugees in Columbus, take them to Washington Courthouse, and back again every day.
Yeah, so I don't think we have too much time left, but I think the last thing we wanted to talk to you about, so the current administration and supporters of this travel ban kind of defend it, saying we're making America safer. Mm-hmm. How would you respond to all of the different defenses of the travel ban?
First of all, you have to think about who refugees are. These are people who are running from terrorists and terrorism, so that's number 1. Number 2, we already have extreme vetting. I don't know how you can do it more thoroughly. I think they have the right to take a look at the system, but calling it a pause is really misleading because we, for example, have at least 500 people overseas waiting to join family members here, including very young children and elderly people who are not a security threat. And the way it was crafted is keeping these families apart. It's not mutually exclusive that you can have, security and compassion at the same time.
Thank you so much again
Thank
for
you.
being with us tonight. Can we
Thank you for
round
having
of
me.
applause for Angie?